It's only day one of the 2024 SuperBet Rapid, and I can already tell this is going to be a truly special event. You have in the field Magnus Carlsen, Norirbek Abdusattorov, Anish Giri, Gukesh, local hero Shevchenko, Pragnananda, Duda, Kaima, Wei Yi, Eragaisi. You might notice that in this field, Carlsen is actually the oldest player at like 33 years of age. It's mostly this young generation. But let's get into the games. We're not going to go to every single one, but we are going to have a look at a decent chunk. We see here Abdusattorov playing the same approach he used to beat Grandelius in the recent Siegmund tournament that he won. By the way, I did include a recap video of that as well, which you may like to check out. Here at this point, Giri's move at knight d4 is... I mean, it's true, it's a plan in these positions to try to clear the way to push your queenside pawns, but I'm not convinced that this was necessarily the way to play it. I think a more patient approach, like a move like a4 and just trying to create some weaknesses in the white position, or even a direct approach like d5 strikes me as being preferable, where in this way we're just kind of opening up the center and making a point at h3, king h2. Might not be the most useful moves for white in a more open position, which kind of affords us that time to lose the tempo with d5. The issue I see with Giri's knight d4 is that, white's plan in this position is basically to push the f pawn. Or if not to push f4, the way that he played against Grandelius was like knight a4 and, transitioning this kind of, English type of Botvinnik formation. But knight d4, even though it avoids that, you're just letting white get in the move f4 very directly, as it happened in the game, in fact. Now, black played the move a4, white just steadily built up with bishop to d2. You could also go f5 and just kind of go for this hack attack with g4, g5, but in the game, Abdusattorov decided to keep a little bit of attention with bishop d2, and now the move bishop c3. If you are enjoying this video, do make sure to leave a like, and also to consider subscribing. And when you subscribe, I also suggest that you tap the notification bell and set to all. That will make sure that you see all of my chess training so you don't miss out on any important ones for you. In this position again, I think you can make an argument for f5 and just going directly for the kingside attack. And I think that such an approach actually is in Abdusattorov's style as well. Just go for it. But yeah, it's hard to keep a bit more tension in the position instead, hoping that okay, if they have to make more decisions, maybe it's more likely they make a wrong one. But Giri handled this phase of the game pretty well. We will be looking at like 7 games here, so I do actually have a launch actually coming up in just a couple of hours, in fact. So what I'll do is I'll put the links that in the description below in case you want to watch a training, like a live training, where you get to comment and like have me reply to in real time and this sort of thing. Well, at least talk to you in real time, answer your questions. But anyway, we'll get to that a bit later. So white played the move b3. You might notice that now fe5 is not really working. There's no rook f6 sack because the rook here is covering it. So white goes b3, black plays b5, and it feels like for the moment that Giri is just outplaying his younger opponent a little bit. So if he plays a move like c4, just trying to open the queen side and weaken that pawn on e4, then yeah, I think white might have some problems. Like, you can't even really take because of bishop b6, and either you lose the exchange or you lose the e-pawn, and neither option is such a great prospect for white, let's put it like this. But after b4 in the game, white's sort of able to stabilize a little bit more. King h1, getting off that diagonal, rook to f8, g4, so starting the attack on the king side, which a computer might not be the biggest fan of this approach, but you have to admit that this does look a little bit scary. And I guess Giri was probably going to play like bishop d8 and just try to blockade on those dark squares, which maybe is why Abdusattorov played knight g1 first, which admittedly is not the most precise. Like, black could have gone ef4 and made the point that if you take the pawn d5 and your king is suddenly a little bit weak here as white. Or they even just play like d4 and sort of make the point that your bishop is biting on granite. Because in the King's Indian, you usually don't want to give black such a good grip over these squares. But rook a2 was played, and yeah, sort of allowed white to kind of get his act together, play f5. And yeah, still Engine is not in love with white's position, but once you play f6 and kind of lock things down, it's not so easy. Then again, we also have to admit that, if black does play a normal move like rook a6, we do have some tricks here, like we can go bishop h6 and, sack a piece, but get a pretty strong attack on the king side. So, this is definitely not a joke from white by any means, from the human point of view. But when you play f6, it's a little bit of an overreaction, admittedly, where, white just has a really good control of the position. It's kind of hard for black to really open up the queen side effectively. Yeah, they can put the rook towards a2 like he did in the game, but it's pretty easy, actually, for white to cover the one weakness on c2 when black does have an easy way to open things up. You can see he went rook a1, trying to reduce the pressure with some exchanges, but still white keeps an advantage here. And, it's just very hard for black even to, get out of the problems on the king side. After rook f7, so this game actually had a really beautiful finish. So let's get to that part. So at this point, white is looking better, but, the sort of reverse also applies, like how does white kind of open things up here in this case. And the way that he did it was with a very thematic sacrifice for King's Indian structures like this one, in the move of knight takes g7. The reason we go for this version and not like bishop takes h6 is that we're kind of keeping the bishop for the attack to support the move of g5 and, get these pawns kind of rolling down the board. Black already has to defend very, very precisely just not to lose on the spot. Like, the only move actually to survive here is to play rook f1, like just completely ignoring the attack of the pawns and going for a counter-attack yourself. Like, this is the only way in which you'll be able to survive as black. And even then, like, after rook g3, it's not like black is completely out of the woods. He still has to find a lot more good moves to not lose from here. And when you're playing a rapid game and don't have so much time to think, it's very easy to make mistakes. And I have to admit, I've kind of forgotten what the exact time control was. Like, I guess we'll see it in the next game. But yeah, the fact that Abdusattorov still has 14 minutes at this point is honestly a little bit crazy to me, actually. But yeah, queen a2, unfortunately, is just not going to cut it after f6. Like, black can't even give back the piece, because then his king is just going to be way too open. After queen b1, rook g3, that covers the queen h1 mate threat. Rook a2, and, Abdusattorov, as many great players before have realized, the best way to deal with the opponent's threat is sometimes just to ignore it. f7, take, g6, like, how often do you get to win in this sort of beautiful fashion? The idea being not to take the rook, okay, to be fair, it does lead to mate as well, but bishop to g2, take, and there's just no defense to g7 checkmate. Like, if they move the knight, then this queen comes this way, and yeah, black just resigned in this position. Just absolutely beautiful, absolutely wonderful finish. And now I have to admit, I'm really, really curious what the time control is. How much time do they start with? Okay, they start with 25 minutes. I'm guessing 10 seconds per mover. Probably should check this before the video, but yeah, I'm focused on the chess content, like the chess improvement stuff, not the idle trivia. But okay, this game, yeah, we do want to get into this one because this features the hero of the day, Kirill Shevchenko. And actually, it's kind of funny. Like, I had someone, I think, on Facebook tell me, yeah, we love seeing Gukesh's wins, but like balance at max, show him some of his losses as well. So yeah, this recap, I guess, will make that guy very happy. Yeah, this knight h4 might look a little bit weird, but kind of the idea is that you sort of get this IQP position where white might have a little something with the with his pieces being quite active, but black is also fairly solid with no real weaknesses here. Castle. Knight f3. Like, Gukesh actually played pretty well. Like, he actually did outplay the, let's say, surprise packet of the tournament early on. Yeah, in this position, maybe a move like bishop f5 and just bring the knight to d5 might be the play. If you do want to avoid some pin with bishop g5, play h6, like, honestly, I could get behind that as well. One nice thing as well is when your knight does get to d5, you also have the b4 outpost, so that does give you, let's say, some prospects to fend off white's initiative. White's going to kind of go moves like queen to... Well, the engine is saying queen c2, but honestly, queen d3 would be more natural to my mind. So, you could potentially, like, go knight e5, like, bring the rooks to the center, like, bishop to b1 even can be an idea to attack, like, the h7 point as an alternative to the pressure against f7. But yeah, you can really feel the energy of white's pieces in such a position. Whereas if you have the pawn e6, you at least kind of block their bishop here a little bit. But yeah, bishop g4 was played, and this attempt to solve the problems by simplifying probably wasn't ideal. The problem with bishop h5, which is a move probably a lot of you guys would play it in a game, but this is going to be just a really strong attack, and you have a very tough task avoiding f4, f5, and winning your bishop. So that was Black's idea, just to give up the bishop pair and just kind of play this position. Kind of funny that actually g4 anyway is still a good move. It kind of reflects the modern, I guess, engine understanding of chess. Because I think most people would just develop normally and just make the point that white's just better with the bishops. But yeah, Gukesh goes his own way, and honestly, it looks pretty good to me. Because the knight's a little bit awkwardly placed right now. Actually, in this position, maybe bishop d2 is actually not the most precise. Perhaps just going for like rook d1 and maybe even thinking about a d5 break could be an idea. Not immediately though, because knight e5 will be a pretty good fork in reply. But if they play like knight b6, you definitely can sort of make the point that Black lacks a little bit of coordination. Like he's not getting his knights to the d5 outpost quite as quickly as before. Anyway, let's see how the game played out. It was bishop d2. Bishop e4 is a good move by Black, just avoiding any of those discovered attacks with the knight. Knight rook e1, knight d6. I'm going to fast forward a little bit just to kind of get to the more critical moment of the game now. It is rapid. It's true that both sides could have improved their play a bit. Actually, this position is one that if I was doing it in a private lesson or in a group lesson, I would probably pause here and make it a good puzzle. And you can definitely think about this position right now if you do want to make it more of a, let's say, interactive training lesson rather than just entertainment. But here I really like the idea of rook e5. Like, this is a way in which you can often outplay even strong players by kind of setting up favourable exchanges for yourself. Here we don't have the isolated queen's pawn anymore. We've got a space advantage on the king's side. We can think about even maybe a knight f6 sack later in the game, or even just jumping into d6. But you can feel, that with the knight sort of on these edge squares, it's a little bit passive for Black. And we do have the bishop pair as well as a kind of long-term advantage to leverage here. But okay, the game saw h4. And I think, if you can get the pawn to h6 and, get this fawn pawn and mate ideas with queen f6, queen g7, then sure, that would be quite nice. But knight f5 is a really good reply by Shevchenko. Like, right now, it's actually Black who is kind of better. Now that white lost his bishop pair, even a move like knight e6 and hitting this pawn strikes me as being very logical. And you do hit the bishop as well. But in the game, Black played queen to d7. A little passive, but I think we can't call it a mistake by any means either. But it does allow white to go d5 and to liquidate his one weakness in the IQP. And by the way, if you do want to know how to exploit the opponent's weaknesses, it is something that I will be covering in a launch of mine that, well, I'll share it with you in probably the next recap video. I don't want to give everything away just yet, but it's something you might want to keep an eye out for if this is something you often find you really struggle to target the opponent's weaknesses effectively, or just don't really know what to do once you get into the middle game. But anyway, as it played out, we had, intermezzo dc6. As always, the little tricks are what allow you to execute your strategy well. Rook d8 was aimed against the move of rook to d1. Though I do think that maybe it's better to play a move like queen e6 and, maybe go for a setup like this here. And, Black is still pretty solid. It's not obvious that the bishop is considerably better than the knight, let's say, in a more symmetrical structure like this one. But rook d8 was played, I guess rook b1 could be considered, but in the game, Gukesh played a5, wanting to try and fix the weakness in Soviet style. Knight g6, knight g3, knight e7, a6. And these pawns can be a little bit of an issue. The king can also become a bit weak if we do get that pawn to h6. And at this point, it looks like, I will admit rook a4 is not the most precise, but I already spent a lot of time on this one game. But bishop h2, so he's defending the pawn with this. G6, h5. It's been a little bit of a back and forth game. Queen e6 arguably is probably not the best defense, but if you do play a move like gh5 and rip open your own king, well, you're probably going to get accused for cheating if you're playing such moves in a rapid game in time trouble. But jokes aside, the game went rook e6, queen e6, rook e4. This is a nice move, rook e4. But after queen e8, this is where it all fell apart in a very tragic fashion for Gukesh. I mean, how long ago was it that he won that candidates? Was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? So, and it's a pretty grueling tournament, right? It takes some time to recover from such an event. But yeah, unfortunately, queen d3 is just basically kind of being a little bit too clever. Where the problem is after takes rook e8, I think Gukesh thought that he had mate with h6, and he just didn't realize that, the knight on f5 is stopping the mate. So obviously, yeah, you have to resign here in this case as it happened. But at this point, white actually was just starting to get a really good position. And actually, if you play queen to e2 here, it's actually very tough for black to find a good move, because you still have the idea of like rook e8 and, this idea from before, in this case, without sacking the queen. But let's say if they do take and grab the pawn, like the problem is that this a7 pawn is just a bleeding weakness here. Like rook b2, rook b7, bishop b8, and like, how are you defending the pawn here as black? It's just really, really bad for him right now. So if Gukesh finds this, well, then my story of this tournament would be very, very different, let's say. But as it happened, Shevchenko got the win. Sometimes you need a little bit of good luck to, to win a tournament. It's all in good sport. The game between Prague and Duda ended in a draw, and honestly, it wasn't the most interesting game, so I'm just going to skip it here. But one draw that I'm not going to skip is this game between Keimer against Wei Yi. When it's a game, honestly, I probably could even just do a whole separate video just on this game. And actually, that's what I'm going to do. Like, it's such a game, like, if I would have covered in, like, 5 or 10 minutes now, it just wouldn't do justice to the game. So I'm going to cover it in, like, a separate video instead. So just stay tuned for that one. And yeah, the other game between Carlsen against Erigaisi. This game also ended in a draw. Like, I'm not going to analyze the game, but I do find it kind of funny that Carlsen played this move of h3 that was covered by Nikos Derlis in his Twitter opening threads, where he sort of showed that h3 is actually a pretty decent move for white in this position, despite appearances. But Erigaisi handled it pretty well, and yeah, it was just a very well played draw by both sides. Wei Yi Carlsen, like, this is getting to round 2. In round 1 we have Abdusattorov and Shevchenko leading as the two players who won in round 1. Now we get to round 2, and I'm not going to analyze this game between Wei Yi against Carlsen. This is one of these games that, like, kind of is... It's instructive in its own ways, but it's not the most, I say, entertaining game I could share. Like, it just ended up being a bit of a dry position where Wei Yi was much better out of the opening and then kind of just got outplayed by Carlsen later. So we're going to kind of skip that one, and also going to skip the Duda Keimer game where, again, this one, it was one where Keimer just sort of very slowly just kind of ground down his opponent. Like, not a lot was really happening for a while, then, suddenly he was, like, up material and it all just kind of clicked for him as such. But yeah, one game I do want to cover with you for round 2 is the game between Abdusattorov against Gukesh, because I feel like this is a matchup that a lot of us are really excited about. Wondering, okay, like, these are the two most promising talents, like, of the juniors, let's say they've kind of developed in a sense, like, number 4 and number 5 in the world right now or something. I think that's right. I would have to check the live ratings, but yeah, Abdusattorov kind of goes his own way, and Gukesh as well, showing a willingness to fight with this d5 in one go. Now after knight f3, it's true that d5 here is maybe not the ideal timing, because your pawn on e5 does become a little bit tender. And, like, the logical ways to defend it kind of leave the d5 pawn not so well protected. So that's not really ideal, and, Gukesh just plays d6, and... Well, let me ask you this, like, what opening does this kind of remind you of, like, with colours reversed? So what's happening is basically Gukesh is playing an Italian game, like the modern Italian, like c3, d3 by white, but he's doing it with opposite colours, which makes things kind of interesting. Now, I could play a move like a4, just not letting black grab that space, and just getting kind of a position to sort of play in the the usual sort of thematic moves, as it were. I think you get the idea of what white's going for. Though it is true in this version, black will probably beat black to the punch with d5. But Abdusattorov plays this move of bishop e3, which is kind of interesting, because I was actually just studying these structures just yesterday in this book, Rock Solid Chess by Sergei Tivyakov. And I sort of keep an eye out for Tivyakov's stuff, actually, because I know it's going, like, way off topic, but he was actually, like, a coach for my group coaching program a couple of years ago, and, like, he was probably, like, all the coaches were good, but he was probably, like, the best coach that I hired from there, probably, in terms of his depth of knowledge. And yeah, he in the, like, London Royal Lopez, or in the Royal Lopez in town, like, he'd often just go for this kind of structure. And so I'll just make the point that, okay, the engine says that, black is doing quite well, but you just have this easy plan of, like, putting the knight on h5, bring the queen in, and, black kind of has to, figure out a way to defend in a certain sense. So very kind of old school by Abdusattorov here. Bishop e6 is a good move, just trading off the strong bishop. Now, if you want to play like fe6, you know, if you're just happy to make a draw, then yeah, it's going to be not so easy to make progress for either side here. Though maybe it's black the one who's pressing right here as pushing the b pawn perhaps. But yeah, he decides to keep the structure more flexible, and that's also going to be pretty good here. I mean, once again, this game kind of had a similar pattern to the previous one. Like, Gukesh was actually playing pretty well in this game. Like, I think he's actually been slightly outplaying Abdusattorov. Like, look at how the knight on g3 just really struggles to find a good square, and, you know, if you do, let's say, put your knight towards c4 as what happens in the game, well, yeah, you get your knight to c4, but now black is the one who's attacking on the king side as such. And after f4, it's actually black who is now much better. But the thing is that Abdusattorov, like I've said this, you know, so many times by now in my videos, but he is literally the world's best player in very bad positions, and he proves it yet again in this game. Like, you know, he doesn't give up and, you know, make some, like, desperate lunge that just weakens the position. No, he just plays king knight f3, just, you know, let's stop f3, and, you know, just ask white, okay, I'm just going to sit in the position, and, like, how are you actually going to win from here? And it often pays off, you know, with this moves like d5 already kind of smack maybe a little of a slight frustration of, you know, I can feel that this position should be very good for black, but how do I actually prove it, in a sense? And the way is to play like knight f3, and, you know, if white takes with a pawn, then d5 kind of works a lot better in comparison. But if white takes with the rook, then the problem is like knight g5, and you sort of get in f3, and, you know, you just rip apart the white king's pawn shelter in this way. So that was really the way to prosecute the advantage as black. And I do know that this is a challenge a lot of you guys face, like this skill of how to convert an advantage into a win. It's something that I'm not sure if I'll cover it so much in content here. I'll probably cover it more in my free Facebook group of adult chess improvers, which I put the link for in the description below. But, you know, just letting you know, I'm aware of this as a problem a lot of you guys face, and, you know, it might make you feel better to know that, you know, even here, like, Gukesh also struggled to, you know, convert the great position into a win. But yeah, after knight g1, it's not even clear that black is better anymore. Like, white just kind of has this fortress, and, you know, how are you going to sort of break through, in a sense? Now, a move like knight e5 and bring the knight around as favoured by the engine strikes me as being it's creative, but a little bit odd at the same time. You know, g4 does strike me as being a bit more natural. When, you know, if black doesn't take on passant, you just, well, you have one pawn break, but white's going to beat you to the punch with h4. So black does open things up. But now white's kind of doing okay. And also, again, notice how, like, Abdusattorov has, like, 14 minutes on the clock to Gukesh's 6, which does come into play a little bit later. I do think, by the way, maybe rook g2 is maybe more precise than rook f2, but, you know, it's sort of splitting hairs at this point. The game went queen f6, king g1, h5, you know, continuing to play it quite ambitiously, which I think is good here. You could play knight f4 and just take the outpost if you wanted to, but Gukesh's gf4 and using the g file is also pretty decent. You know, position still kind of remains in the balance here. Black plays a move knight g5, which, after it actually, it took me a sec to realize that this is, you know, is actually a move you can play. But, you know, to my mind, like rook g8 and trying to bring the rook in sort of struck me as being more natural. But, okay, it doesn't affect the evaluation. After queen f2, queen e6. So this was Gukesh's idea. He wanted to try and get at that h3 pawn, but queen g2 does defend it. Rook g8 was played, and actually here there was a little bit of an opportunity missed, where here white could have played this move of h4, with a point that when the knight moves queen d2 and you actually just win a pawn. Like, it looks kind of obvious in hindsight, but yeah, this was a thing, in fact. Because if rook g4, you have rook f4, and yeah, the point is you're covering h4 of the x-ray, and, you know, if queen d6, you just break the pin, and you're just going to be fine here with the extra pawn and a winning position. But after rook g1, yeah, black played the move rook g6 and, you know, allowed a second opportunity to get in this h4 move. Yeah, black should probably just play like queen f6 here, and, you know, now f4, h4 now run into this knight f3 tactic, which would turn the tables on white as you can see. But yeah, not the easiest thing to see when you have 18 seconds on the clock. And, well, as it turns out, Abdusattorov did take his second chance. He did play h4. And now the idea is a little bit different. The idea is that you transition into this winning endgame. After knight g2, they just can't defend the pawn anymore, because f3, knight f4, you're still going to scoop it up anyway here as white. But yeah, in the game after knight e5, it was basically just a matter of technique. And since Abdusattorov, is from Uzbekistan, country of very good chess culture, we know his technique is going to be top notch. Even knight e5 is not giving him any sort of chance whatsoever. Knight e6, take, just taking everything. Knight e1 at least trying to get counterplay, but unfortunately the pawn's just dropping off like flies here. And after knight c6, a5, yeah, there's no stopping this pawn. Well, you can stop it, but you lose all your other pawns along the way. And since there's no way to stop the h-pawn now from queening, this is why Gukesh resigned. Bit of a rough start for him. You could probably say, to be fair, we kind of know that Gukesh is not as strong in blitz or rapid as in classical. Then again, the world championship is decided in classical chess, not rapid blitz, so I guess it works out. But yeah, Abdusattorov, of course, being the world rapid champion of 2021, and he kind of showed why with these first two games. Guerriero Geisy was just a very balanced draw. Like, both sides just played very, very well. Not really any disruption to the balance so much. So we're going to skip that game and go to the last game of round 2. For those who are wondering, there were 3 rounds that were played in this event. So we're probably looking about, 45, 50-minute recap or so. Maybe I'll end up cutting a little bit short at some point, because I do have some other things to get to. But yeah, this game here, we see Shevchenko playing against Prague, and he actually found a really beautiful idea. It is true, bishop d2 is not the usual move. Like, normally black goes bishop e7 and kind of plays it more in a kind of King's Indian sort of style, with the bishop on e7 rather than g7. But it is true, white should be a little bit better with the extra space in this case. Like, if not just bishop e2 or bishop d3, like any normal move is going to be okay here. But yeah, instead of that, black played bishop d2, giving up the bishop pair. And he just wanted to go for a dark squared strategy with queen e7 and e5, like very typical Bogo Indian ideas. But after castles, it turns out that, for some very subtle reasons, black should probably play a move like a5 here. Which might seem a bit strange at the moment, but it'll make a bit more sense when we see how the game plays out. To be fair, if you want to play e4 and just kind of play with the space, white's probably still a bit better, but this I think would be an acceptable approach to the position to switch to light squared play. But Prague played the move bishop g4, which first glance seems a reasonable enough move. You want to develop your knights, potentially out blocking in the bishop on c8, and you kind of ask white what he's going to do, but Shevchenko came up with a really great answer, and this is such an instructive position. I actually recommend, if you're really serious about improving your chess, that you actually pause here for a moment and try to figure out the move that Shevchenko played as white. Because once you find this, everything just sort of clicks together for white for the rest of the game. That's the hint I'm giving you guys. Okay, so I assume that you've either paused the video and decided on your move and you want to know what Shevchenko played, or you just want to know what Shevchenko played. But yeah, knight takes e5 is going to be a very strong blow. And the idea actually is not to play the move bishop takes b7, which is what I first thought, but it's actually to play bishop b4, and you skewer him in this way. Now, if black does play like queen e8, for example, you can just take, and what you'll kind of notice when the dust finally settles is that, okay, the computer wants to play d5 first before flicking in your bishop b7, saying you even win a full rook if they take back on e5. But okay, the point remains so that in this sort of position that white just has a million pawns to go with the the 2 rooks versus the 3 minor pieces, which does tip the scales just being basically winning for white. But yeah, in the game, Prague played c5, and we can kind of see why. So that after queen c7, he at least is not going to be losing the pawn on b7 and losing the second exchange as well. The problem though is that after d takes c5, again, they can't take as a bishop b7. What we see here is that white just has 3 pawns and a rook for, the 2 knights. Like, even a rook and a pawn is almost enough compensation for the 2 knights normally, and here we have 2 more than that. So it's not really such a surprise that Shevchenko did go on to convert his advantage. It's going to be a little bit brief just so we have time to cover the other games, but notice how white is sort of keeping the control. Just make sure all the pieces are protected so black doesn't get any swindling chances. Yeah, maybe I would have gone b4 first, but maybe Shevchenko was a bit concerned about counterplay of a5 here, so he played the move e4 instead. b4, yeah, black decided to use that outpost with knight d4, but queen b2 is a good defense, not allowing any nonsense with knight e2 or something. Rook d8, h3, again, very well played by white. Maybe rook f2 is not the most precise. It's probably better to put the rook on e1 and just kind of hit the bishop that way. So that if they do play like bishop to c4, like you can kind of go rook ed1 and just keep the pin in that sense. Because if you take the knight, like you basically just win. But yeah, the game went rook f2. Apparently black can still survive to some extent with bishop c4. Like you sort of can like get in and sort of say that white's queenside pawns are a little bit of a weakness. But after bishop f3, it kind of clicks together for white, like a5. a4 is a nice trick, realizing that the queen is needed to defend the bishop. Queen to c4. Yeah, if I had this in the game, I probably would have played the move b5 and kept my structure a bit more stable, but the move Shevchenko played ba5 is not awful by any means either. But maybe also not the most precise, perhaps. After queen b3, yeah, the game sort of went a little bit back and forth. Like, there were some chances for black to kind of, to sort of save himself. Like, here, actually, black's not doing that badly. Like, this ending is actually quite decent for him. So, quite impressed for Prague to kind of turn things around with some very active piece play. But still, the game goes on, and, it's also true that, well, both sides are in time scramble, so, it's going to get pretty hairy. King e8, rook d1. I kind of like rook b1, actually, just kind of tying up their knights a bit, but yeah, rook fd1 was played, the rook kind of slid in, but for the moment, it looks like, if black does it, sort of admit the mistake and play rook d8. I mean, normally, in principle, you don't want to trade your one rook when your opponent has two rooks, because you kind of want to keep the rook's power and, like, leave him with this superfluous rook on d1. But this position is an exception because of some tactical points. Because Prague thought he could play the move knight b8 and sort of hit the pawn, hit the rook, and try to force white to play a bit passively, like rook d5 or something. But then there's another tactical blow. e6 is very, very strong. They can't take the rook because we have a fork. They can't take the pawn on e6 because then we have rook h7 and we're threatening rook h8, but if they take the pawn, well, then we just take the knight, we're up in exchange, and we just win here. So black in desperation played knight a6, trying to pull himself together, but it's a case where the damage has already been done. These connected passes with the rooks are such a powerful force. Like, already black is having to worry about just getting mated, simply. The game ended rook e5, take, f7, and there's just no defense to rook h8 check, and so Prague are resigned here. Very well played game at the end by Shevchenko, where, yeah, some mistakes were made, but in the end he found the tricks when it mattered, and that's how you beat strong chess players at the end of the day, by seeing the little tricks and them not seeing it. Now we get to round 3, and already we see, well, that Shevchenko and Abdusattorov were equal in the lead on that. Basically, they do have a point system where you score 2 points for a win in Rapid, 1 point for a draw, and 0 for a loss. So basically, the Rapid games have double the weighting of the Blitz games, essentially. And so basically, you had the two leaders, on 100% score, but Abdusattorov lost to Prague in this game, and this was, I think, a pretty well played game by Prague. Like, I didn't look at it with the engine, I just played through the moves, like, just with using my own brain, let's say. But I do like the way he kind of kept control. Abdusattorov playing this slightly unusual system in the Hanem Philidor, but of course, black is passive, but is going to be fairly solid. This all are pretty standard. You could argue maybe queen d4 is a little more active than bishop d4, but the difference is not gigantic, let's say. So knight to f8, queen to d3. Queen e3 does a small bit of prophylaxis, saying that, okay, black has less space here, so he definitely wants to trade the minor pieces, especially to relieve the cramp. So Prague is saying, okay, let's just place the queen so that our bishop is defended in advance. And while the computer has its own ideas, like it wants to, play like queen d2 and just kind of keep the pieces sort of on the board, just sort of leaving black congested, you can't argue that there is a certain logic to Prague's play as well here. a6 is a good move going for b5 at a time when white is not able to go a5 and fix the structure. So very astute by Abdusattorov. And I think once you get to this position here, black's actually probably doing quite fine. Like, white's structure has lost a little bit of flexibility. And the trade of bishops means, the knight now has a nice square. But still, the game goes on, and yeah, at this point, I think a move like knight d4 actually makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's going to be kind of similar to what we'll see in the game, actually. Except in the game, Well, actually, it's not so similar, because black played bishop f8, and white played the move e5, wanting to try to make use of his lead in development before black develops the rook. Black played the move knight takes d4. Maybe you could argue that perhaps d5 is maybe a little bit more solid, but maybe Abdusattorov didn't like putting his knight under a self-pin, even though it turns out you can play queen c8 and they don't really have a way to exploit it. But yeah, from a human point of view, you could slightly understand this logic. Anyway, knight d4 is also reasonable, but it does make it a little more awkward to deal with the pin as such, where actually the machine kind of likes this move of queen b6 that Abdusattorov played. If you're wondering why can't white just take the knight, it's because you have takes and queen d4. Just very, very tricky by black. So white plays the move a5. This is actually quite clever by Prague, because without this he'd probably have a rough position, but we leverage the fact that the queen needs to stay covering that rook. White now goes rook f4, and suddenly this is where the game becomes absolutely beautiful. Like, this was just an absolute brilliancy, I think, by Prague. And I'm saying that even without knowing whether he followed up in the best way, but like, rook takes f6 is just absolutely fantastic. Like, if you play a normal move like rook e5, the problem is that you're going to have some pins to deal with, and you're just losing the initiative, and bishop beats knight in an open position. The rook f6, now it's a different story. Like, actually the move queen f5 might have even been better. We just go knight e4 and just immediately establish that blockade on the light squares, and make the point that their bishop is just awful if it goes to g7. And also a nice point about this move as well is, like, just to not lose, you apparently have to play this move of e4 and just, like, sacrifice a cold pawn, just so that you can kind of, like, try and trade off the rooks and, open lines for the rooks that, aren't the case otherwise. Yeah, in the game knight e4, like, it's maybe not the best move, but you can sort of, like, understand the logic of it. Like, knight h4, and, if white gets a position like this one with the knight f5, like, your knights are just completely dominating their pieces. You'll just bring the queen and the rook in, and black will probably have to resign at some point then. So, to Abdusattorov's credit, he found a very good defense move f5, realizing that it's more important to kind of get your pieces free than to worry about the material. But still, it's a very tough attack. Like, normally it's Abdusattorov on the other side, like, throwing the piece at black's king. But Prague also a very tactical player. And rook d4, I think the intention is good, that you want to try and, get rid of this knight at any price. But the game sort of showed that white can also just kind of ignore it. So this is maybe the reason why perhaps an approach like rook d5 might have been preferable here. And if they do play like rook g3, like, maybe there was some concern that, white might, try and get the knights in some way. But for the moment, it does look like black can hold, like playing like queen b8, queen e8, and, white definitely has a really good compensation, but it doesn't appear to be a knockout blow, where black is just barely holding everything together with his pieces. Anyway, still would still be a very sharp position, of course. But in the game, rook d4, apparently it's actually very good to flick in the move rook g3 and then take the rook, just kind of forcing their knight to an awkward square. But in the game, queen e2 was played, and black went with his plan of returning the exchange, but at least, trying to get some sort of play. That being said, white is now still, I think, having a pretty good control, because the knight is just kind of dominating the bishop, especially with being on a light square. It's very hard for black to get at it here. H4 maybe not the best move, but you can sort of understand the logic of, wanting to try and even bring the pawns into the attack, maybe fix the pawn on h6 as a weakness like we saw in the game. Bishop e7, queen at f3, bishop g5. I like this idea of Abdusattorov to try and activate his passive bishop and make things a little more balanced. And also knight e3, I think, is a nice move. We just discover that attack on the pawn as well as the queen, which does force black to play queen d7. Now, at this point, we end up getting this endgame after take, queen to d1, and, like, this queen ending, objectively speaking, should be a draw. Because, white's a pawn up, but his king is a bit open, and, you kind of really need to queen a past pawn in order to win this sort of endgame, and white is a very long way from doing that. But what Prague does quite well is just kind of just keeping the game going, just shuffling the pieces. You could argue maybe king g8's a better square for the king, but maybe Abdusattorov just didn't want to allow these sort of forks in the future. But king h7, king h3, he did play to move king to g8. And unfortunately, that's kind of where the game sort of turned, where I think here black does have to Well, black starts to be quite precise. Like, it's not a guarantee that you're going to give perpetual check. But a move like queen f1, for example, and just like setting up those kind of annoying checks, I think was the way to play it. Also, queen e1 with similar ideas, but also attacking the pawn, I think you could also make a pretty good argument for. Like, for a human point of view, I think I like queen e1 better. You're just kind of eyeing everything with one queen move, in a sense. But after king g8, white was able to basically just continue sort of giving checks for tempo, just continually improving the position of the queen, until eventually the queen could just sit on f3 and just kind of just cover everything really very well here. Queen c4, queen f4. It's not the top line, but it's a pretty good idea to, defend erring with your queen and also hit their weaknesses. Like, f4 is just a very, very good square for the queen in this position. King f3, not fearing a check because we do have the counter check. Like, white's a pawn up, so the pawn endgame is going to be a win. Queen b3 was played, still good defense by Abdusattorov. They continue to shuffle around a bit with the pieces, just keep the game going. I mean, the reservation with g4 is that if the queen can get in, like queen c2, if the queen gets in, it might become harder to avoid a perpetual check in the future, but it is a little bit of a minor point, let's say. After queen e6, white was sort of able to, once again, kind of assert his authority, like just continuing to improve the position of the queen with tempo. Actually, in this version, you could all even play like king f4 and sort of make the point that queen c4, queen d4, and you sort of just like get out of the checks in a sort of creative way, like king e5, and your king just uses these pawns as a shield. Which, I think if I remember correctly, actually, Prague, he didn't use this idea in the game, but it sort of was a related point. So, here it's still hard to say, like, is it a win? Is it just going to be a draw? But in Rapid, it doesn't really matter what the evaluation is, because someone's probably going to miss something at some point anyway in time trouble. Once you get in g5, it just sort of clicks together for white. Probably should just play queen d8 and, just kind of sit on the position and pray, that white doesn't have a breakthrough. And I mean, if black plays perfectly, maybe you can still hold, but it's going to be very close. But after queen e6, once you get that past pawn, it just becomes so much easier from white's point of view. Because now if the queen strays too far, he has to worry about things like, h6 and queen g7 mate, for example. Which, really is tying black up here. And if you do try to give checks again, the king is just going to just start running like king d4 and just use the black pawns as a shield, essentially. But after f5, queen f4 was played. Maybe at this point, king f2 might be a bit more precise, just prophylaxis against the checks, basically. But queen f4 was played, queen d5, the king started to run around this way. Still probably not spoiling too much, to be fair. And in general, in the queen endgames, you really want to centralize your queen, and that's what I really love about the move of queen e5, just putting the queen in the center and just making it hard for black even to find a great move. The game ultimately concluded queen d3, white, used that pawn as a bit of a shield, queen h4, king e6, and black just doesn't really have any great checks. After queen c4, white now took the pawn on f5, and by the way, black does keep giving checks, like you're just going to go like king e6, and again, like in the worst case, you can kind of use these pawns as a shield to avoid perpetuals in that way. And I mean, you are up like 2 for pawns, so even if you lose 1, it's not that big of a deal. But after queen b4, king g5, and even just mate is kind of a problem. Like after king h6, there's no good way to stop the mate threats, and therefore Abdusattorov resigned here. Now there is one more game I would like to share with you from this, and it was a very interesting draw by Carlsen. But before I share that, just so you know the other results, Gukesh did get on the scoreboard drawing against Geary. Actually, I stand corrected. There are actually two more games I'll share. But okay, also Erigaisi and Wei ended in a draw. Erigaisi drew all 3 of his first 3 games. Like, he played in a very good quality, but his opponent just didn't really give him that many chances, let's say. That can sometimes happen in chess at the top level. But okay, there are 2 more games I want to share with you guys. The first game is this one between Carlsen against Duda, and this is one where Carlsen's played this h3 anti-knight off, which at first glance looks completely ridiculous, but actually after seeing how good of a position that Carlsen got in the game, I'm actually kind of tempted to try it myself. Like, the idea is, let's say if black plays a normal move like knight c6, you're just going to play something like knight takes c6 and, put the pawn on a5 and, sort of make the point that with black's pawns being kind of fixed, that this is just going to be very, very pleasant for white to play, essentially. And if they try to stop this d4 of e5, well, then you go bishop c4 and just have a decent grip over the d5 square, as it were. So Duda played the move e6, trying to be a little bit flexible, but after d4, you can sort of make the point that, well, you normally play h3 in the sort of Adam's attack of the knight off, like you avoided, the e5 lines, for example. So the game went b6, g4, bishop g7, bishop g2. So both sides are playing pretty normally. White's going for the kingside pawn storm, and black is going to try to create counterplay on the queen side. If they can get in like b5 or get some play down the c file, for instance. Carlsen played a move of queen d4, which maybe isn't the very best move in the position, but it does ask some questions at least. To my mind, maybe queen e2 and just short castling might be a bit more simple, but okay, Carlsen went for the maximalist approach, going for b3 and wanting to sap this attack down the long diagonal. And Duda, I think, responded fairly well to this initially. Like, b5 is a good move here. And also e5 is a good move. Like, it is true you are giving up the d5 hold to the knights. But black's getting some pretty good counterplay in return. Like, b takes a4 was played. Knight takes a4, so, knight's kind of moved away from the d5 outpost. But you also don't want to play ba4, because then you just have so many weaknesses on the queen side with the structure. Like, even c5 then becomes an outpost for the knight. So you do kind of have to take with the knight in that sense. f6, and yeah, white side to play very creatively here. So far it almost feels like Duda is outplaying Carlsen, weirdly enough, but after g6 the game does start to shift a little bit in the next moves. Actually, it would even be very interesting to play a move like f5 and just kind of leave the pawn as a kind of shield and just sort of go for your own attack. That would actually be pretty promising, but okay, h6 is never going to be bad by any means either. g5, you just keep the king side closed. Knight c3, king h8, knight d5. Both sides are still playing quite well here. a5. Long castling looks kind of risky, but it's actually the best move, because you do need to get the rook in the game to have any chance of your attack working. At this point, yeah, black side to take the knight and just play it this way. You could argue that maybe c7's a better square for the queen, just so that you can potentially put the rook on c8 and maybe have some mate threats against c2 in the future. But queen b6 was played, bishop h3 does stop rook c8 concepts. a4, obviously we don't want to have the queen side open to our own king, so b4 keeps that covered. Knight a6, queen e6, and actually it was at this point, turns out queen e6 is very natural, but it's actually probably a mistake here, compared to, say, b5, for instance. Because after queen e6, black can actually play this move of rook to a7 and just cover the bishop in that way. Because say if you play h6, black just goes g6 and you just don't really have a way through to the black king, which is a bit of a problem here. So that's what black should have done, but instead he played knight takes b4. And actually here Carlsen, it's kind of funny that he said Kasparov, but it looks like a Kasparov position, but yeah, at this point, Carlsen actually missed a little bit of an opportunity, which I will admit is a pretty difficult one to see. But it turns out the idea is actually you shouldn't take the bishop immediately. Because then, like, knight a2 and your king kind of gets killed, so you don't want to go for this. But you can actually ignore the threat with the move of h6. And the point is, like, if b6, you kind of get this position in a much better version compared to the game. Because here you're able to play for queen g7 mate threat to black isn't in time to save himself with a counterattack. But if they do play knight a2 and try to mate your king now, well, now the difference is that surprisingly your king doesn't get mated. Sorry, not king e2. Yeah, actually here, hang on, I just realized I missed that why I can play queen a2. So okay, if I can miss a queen a2 as possible, I have the injured turn on. This already tells you how difficult a variation this is to see in the game. And yeah, Carlsen, had 6 minutes, not a huge amount of time, but like that's sort of a very difficult example of comparison method, realizing that, okay, we won't have to get rid of the knight so that knight a2 isn't coming after queen e7, but flicking in this intermediate move so we have the mate threat is what's going to turn it around for white. Very difficult, but after bishop b4, queen e7, now black has a3 and is sort of able to basically give a perpetual. After h6, queen b2. White has no good way out of the perpetual. Like if you go king e2, you can't play king f1 because of the rook will then be hanging with a check after that. So it would just be a draw again. And yeah, in the game, they just to agree to draw in this way. Okay, that leaves us with one more game to check out. The third win of Shevchenko. It's not crazy because like the bottom seed by the tournament, like not just on the like rapid ranks, but if you take like FIDE ranks, I think it might even be a bigger margin. But yeah, he just ends up starting with 3 out of 3, you know, beating Gukesh, beating Prague, and now beating Vincent Keimer with black is just like this absolute dream tournament for him. So yeah, and in this game, like, you know, it started out a little bit quietly, you know, White trying to just, you know, play a flank opening, you know, maybe avoid some fury and just try to get a position to play, like, for example, if Bishop d6, you know, something like this would, you know, be fairly comfortable for White. Like, you just put the pieces on natural squares and just put pressure on the IQP gradually. Like Rook c1, potentially bring the bishop in. But instead, Black played the move d4, cutting across the plans. Definitely like the ambition. And of course, we have to watch out for d3 potentially winning the bishop. So White plays bishop b5. Bishop c5 was played. We had queen e2, you know, just again trying to be a little bit annoying here. We had take. Queen e5, because yeah, if Black gets to keep these pawn alive and have the bishops, he's just going to be much better. So White does decide to nab that pawn. But what we see here is that Black actually has pretty good compensation here, because he has the bishop pair on an open board, and pretty free development. In fact, even just getting out of bishop f3 and the doubling of the pawns around your king is actually not the easiest task. Like, say if you play queen d3 to cover it, Black can kind of go bishop e4 and, you know, sort of make this point that your queen is just a little bit awkward and, you know, you've got some threats to kind of work with here. But yeah, in the game White played queen h4, we did have takes, bishop takes, because if you play g takes like knight d5 and, you know, your king is a little bit of a problem even with the exchange of queens, like White just has so many pawn weaknesses that it's actually Black who will be fighting for the advantage here. So White plays bishop f6, you know, just to give Black a little bit of a weakness as well here. But still, you'd have the bishop against the knight, and you do have some decent play. It's a position where maybe White is still the one pressing, but if Black plays carefully, you know, he should be able to draw. So rook d8 threatens the move bishop takes c3, using that pin on the d file. White goes knight e4 to defend the knight and the pawn. Black does take the pawn back. And yeah, position is still, I think, about equal, but probably can say White maybe is the one who is pressing, just because of the weakness of those doubled pawns. But yeah, Black continues to play quite reasonably. Like c5 is really, I think, quite a natural move in that, you know, knight c5 does allow even a move like bishop e5 where you can sort of hit the pawn and, you know, go like rook h4 and just kind of keep White tied up to the defense that way. So yeah, quite a nice idea. And, you know, in the game White just played knight e4 and defended it that way. We had king h8, you know, trying to bring the rook into the game that way and attack the king. Sort of interesting point here. You have sort of enough piece on the board, you can actually go for the attack on the king here, in a sense. Though, to be fair, I think a move like rook d2 and, you know, just taking the pawn back surely is what most normal people would do. But yeah, h5 trying to spice things up a little bit more. And Keimer actually found a very good defense in the move of knight f1, defending the pawn and, yeah, just kind of consolidating the position a bit. You know, Keimer, of course, being a very, very good technical player, you know, coached by, you know, a previous World Championship finalist, Peter Lecco. The game continued rook c2, you know, rook g8. You know, Black is also continuing to find good moves, just continuing to be a little bit annoying here. You know, king e2, rook e8, you know, threatening to move f4, so we can sort of see how it's not so easy for White to consolidate. Like, if you go king d3, for instance, trying to break the pin, well, then you're running into these tricks like this pawn's on and the knight is on at the same time. So Black will get back the material. Up to king f1, rook f4. I mean, at some point, maybe the best option for White is just to kind of accept that it's just equal. Like, say around this point here. Yeah, in this position, White should probably just play... There's a lot of moves you can choose from, but a move like rook c6 and just, you know, going for rook h6 and taking the pawn strikes me as the most natural. You know, just kind of like just sort of play normal moves and sort of admit that, okay, if Black plays well, he's going to make a draw. Unfortunately for him, rook c3 was maybe not ideally timed. Actually, it turns out that it's not as bad as it looks, but rook d4 does ask the question of how to defend against f4. And yeah, at this point, White does have to be a little bit sort of creative, I guess, in his defense. Because if you play a move like king d1, actually bishop a5 is asking some pretty tough questions of White on how he's going to defend both rook d2, bishop c3, and rook takes e3. So probably the best move here is just to play like f4 and, just give the pawn back, but kind of stabilize and, make the point that you'll be able to still maintain the balance with, with sort of your coordination of the pieces. But yeah, instead after rook hc1, this just blunders to f4, where black just wins the knight. I think what kind of misses, I think he thought he had this rook c8 trick to kind of save the piece. And I think he just missed it. You have this bishop takes d8, where you just block the whole, thing of breaking the pin. And it means black just wins the piece. So after rook c8, take, it's just a matter of breaking that pin on the rook so that our bishop is free to move again. The game went for some more moves, but at least when I was looking from a human point of view, it seemed like, Shevchenko was always winning it. He was never not winning from this point. Because at one point it was down to a stage where, like, black has only one pawn left, but the fact that, we have, like, the right rook's pawn, where we will be covering the promotion square with the bishop if all the white pawns get taken, it does mean that, it will be winning. The way to win when you have an extra piece in these situations is just to kind of shuffle the piece around and just sort of let them fall into a zugzwang. It's true, the computer will tell you there's some faster ways to win, but he never really spoiled it. Just continuing to just slowly run white out of moves. And now it kind of goes this way, just making the point that, you're never really worried about the move f6 in a sense, because the bishop can always cover it from afar. And after a little bit of shuffling, eventually, he came up with the winning plan. Just bring the bishop around this way. If the white does play it more quietly, you can just play like even, bishop c5 and just kind of steadily run the king out of moves. So white played f6, bishop came back, and just a matter of rounding up that pawn. After king f5, king f7, eventually you can just take the pawn, and then it's easy. Where in this position, you just are going to play bishop a5 and just anchor the defense the last pawn that way, and that is why white resigned. So it was a lot of fun to go for this recap. This one was a little bit long, like probably the subcoms I like try to make a little bit shorter, because I do have a lot of, other things I'm kind of working on as well. But if you enjoyed this video, do make sure to let me know in the comments below, and also let me know, like, what was your favorite game that we looked at, or, your favorite move from the games that we looked at. And, on that note, I will see you all in the next training video. Also, if you do happen to see this video, like in, let's say, the first hour that it's released, I will be doing a live training, so I will be sharing how you can access that in the comments link below, in the description. Like, even if you miss the live one, you'll still be able to catch a replay, so it'll still be worth checking that out. But on that note, I will see you in the next training, and until then, take care.